Welcome, everyone. So you've brought us some really interesting material for a deep dive today, focusing on um, understanding and really enriching sexual intimacy within marriage.
That's right. The source is The Married Guy's Guide to Great Sex by Dr. Cliff and Joyce Penner. They're very experienced sexual therapists, authors.
Right. In the book, it seems like its main goal is to help husbands
Mhm.
specifically cultivate, deeper love, passion, intimacy,
Mm.
ultimately leading to a better sexual relationship.
Exactly. And our mission today really is to pull out those key insights, the actionable advice from the Penners that could help, well, frankly, any married person. Doesn't matter where you are now.
Yeah, the idea is to build a richer, more satisfying sexual connection. And it's worth noting, this book's got endorsements from people like Dr. Rick and Kay Warren, Gary Chapman, Jim Daly,
Which definitely adds some weight, doesn't it? Shows it's
Yeah.
respected in the field.
for sure. Okay, so let's really dive in. What's the first big idea the Penners hit us with?
Well, what's really striking right away is how they challenge this very common assumption that good sex in marriage just sort of happens naturally.
Oh, yeah, that myth. Like it should just magically click into place.
Right. They really push back hard against that. Their core point is that, satisfaction in this area, it isn't automatic. It actually takes conscious effort, intentionality
From both partners, right?
from both. Yes, it demands responsibility from both sides.
It's almost like we romanticize it, thinking preparation somehow spoils it. They tell that story, don't they? About the really smart, engaged couple.
They do, who didn't want to read the book beforehand because they thought, preparing would ruin it.
Crazy. And Joyce's grandmother, too, thinking Adam and Eve didn't need a manual, so why should we?
Exactly. It just shows how deep that belief runs.
So where do they go from challenging that myth?
Well, from there, they introduce this really important concept. They call it the sexually naive male.
Okay, what does that mean exactly? It's not about
Mhm.
intelligence, is it?
No, not at all. It's more about how a guy's upbringing or maybe a lack of thorough sexual development can lead him to do things that feel natural to him but are actually, well, pretty unnatural or even unhelpful inside the marriage.
Ah, so it's about learned behaviors versus what actually works for connection.
Precisely. Often it stems from like societal pressures, maybe not getting great sex ed. It leads to a kind of skewed view of intimacy, especially female desire.
That's a really key distinction because guys often pick up these messages, don't they? That they're meant to be the initiator, always ready.
Right. And that can create this real gap in a marriage where, expectations just don't line up.
Yeah. They give that example, the poignant one of the new husband.
Oh, yeah, where he makes what seems like a totally natural advance to him.
But it really hurts his wife. She felt, what was it, objectified, not really desired as a person.
Exactly. It just highlights so clearly how what feels intuitive to one person can land completely differently for their partner.
So this leads into another big point they make, right? About the purpose of sex in marriage.
Yeah, it's a really crucial one. That sex at its heart in marriage should be about relating, connecting, not about achieving something or conquering or scoring points, as they put it.
They use that analogy, the
Yeah.
NCAA mentality, that kind of
Yeah.
competitive mindset.
Yeah, that really landed. They explain how for a lot of men, even positive early experiences, like, say, getting praised for sports,
Uh-huh.
can kind of unintentionally train them to see interactions in terms of winning and losing, and that competitiveness can unfortunately sometimes spill over into intimacy.
Hmm. That's insightful. And they connect this back to dating behavior too, don't they?
They do. They point out how a guy who's always pushing for more sexually before marriage
Right.
often inadvertently trains the woman to be the one constantly setting boundaries, defending them.
And if he keeps pushing against those boundaries.
It can actually teach her to resist intimacy. And that pattern, sadly, can just carry right on after the wedding.
It's so counterintuitive, isn't it? You'd think being more assertive would lead to more sex.
Yeah.
But they're saying true gratification comes from something else entirely.
Exactly. It comes from that deep connection, that mutual enjoyment, not just how often or how intense the arousal is or, orgasm itself.
The contrast, like just grabbing at your wife versus creating this whole atmosphere of cherishing her.
Yes. Such a stark difference. And the outcomes are just worlds apart. They really emphasize shifting focus away from just the results of stimulation.
Like orgasm.
Right. And focusing instead on the process of pleasure itself, the shared journey.
That makes sense. It takes the pressure off, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Allows for more relaxation, enjoyment.
Absolutely. Takes that whole performance anxiety piece off the table.
Okay, so if it's not about achieving or scoring,
Mhm.
what is the main recommendation then for actually improving things?
Their really central piece of advice, the cornerstone, maybe, is summed up in 3 words: go her way.
Go her way. Okay.
They argue, pretty convincingly, I think, that when a husband genuinely tries to prioritize his wife's needs, her desires, in the bedroom, it actually leads to more happiness for both of them and a much better sex life overall.
That sounds clear, but what does going her way actually look like, practically speaking?
Well, it really starts with understanding some pretty fundamental differences, like how men and women often experience the need for connection differently.
Okay.
The Penners highlight this. Men often want sex in order to feel connected.
Right. Sex leads to connection for them.
Often, yeah. Whereas women frequently need to feel loved, emotionally connected first as a kind of prerequisite for even wanting sex.
Ah, that's a huge distinction. So for him, sex might be the door to intimacy, but for her, intimacy is the key to the door.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. So it means tuning into her needs for nurturing those emotional, relational desires that go way beyond just the physical act.
It's about making her feel genuinely cared for, valued as a whole person.
Precisely. That she's seen, understood, cherished for who she is, not just her body. When that happens, they argue, she's much more likely to want that deeper sexual connection.
They even suggested that calendar idea, didn't they? For the wife to track her cycle, moods, interest levels.
Yeah, as a private tool first, maybe
Yeah.
something she could choose to share with her husband if she's comfortable, just to help both partners understand her rhythms better.
And it's not just emotional, right? They also talk about the physical differences.
Oh, absolutely. They really underscore the greater complexity of a woman's sexual anatomy and her typical response compared to a man's.
How so?
Well, it often involves multiple parts of the body, multiple erogenous zones. The whole experience tends to be more internal, more comprehensive, and it often unfolds on a different timeline.
Right. They mentioned that Ann Landers survey, the famous one.
Yes, where a lot of women actually said they preferred cuddling to intercourse, which really just highlights the need for that whole person approach, doesn't it?
It really does. And what about this idea they bring up about women needing to take pleasure? That sounds interesting.
Yeah, it is. They explain that for a woman to really fully enjoy sex, to let go, she needs to feel empowered, able
Mhm.
to receive touch, receive pleasure, arousal, passion.
So it's an active receiving, not just passive.
Exactly. That metaphorical switch for desire, as they put it, it's in her brain. And she needs to feel safe, secure, genuinely willing to receive for that switch to really flip on.
Okay, so going her way involves a lot of understanding, a lot of sensitivity. What about practical strategies? What can couples actually do?
Well, one really key strategy, and it sounds a bit paradoxical at first, is allowing space to be natural by planning and anticipating.
Planning. Doesn't that kill the spontaneity everyone thinks is so important?
That's the common thought, yeah. But the Penners make a really strong case that, especially in long-term relationships with, jobs, kids, life,
Right, real life.
a bit of planning can actually enhance the experience. Just the act of looking forward to being together builds excitement. And actually setting aside time makes it much more likely to happen.
Okay, that makes sense. So concrete examples.
Things like actively getting rid of interruptions. Phones off, make sure the kids are sorted. And they even suggest women can do things to build their own anticipation, like maybe a relaxing bath or even just allowing some private fantasy time.
So it's about setting the stage,
Mm,
logistically and mentally?
exactly. And then they also talk about actually negotiating the sexual relationship, which sounds very
Uh,
businesslike.
yeah, negotiating sex sounds a bit cold.
It does. But they argue this kind of open, honest talk can be surprisingly effective. Setting aside time to discuss needs, desires, expectations, maybe even writing some stuff down.
Like what kind of stuff?
Questions about, how often, what kind of touch feels good, who usually initiates, and is that working? What preparation helps each person get in the mood? Best time of day, how long, what activities? All of it is fair game for discussion.
Wow, okay.
They really emphasize that this seemingly cold approach can actually generate a lot of warmth and connection because both people feel heard, respected, understood.
And what about that lag behind rule? What's that about?
Yes. The idea there is to try and keep your own level of sexual intensity just slightly less than where you perceive your wife is at.
Why?
The thinking is it can kind of create a desire for more in her rather than making her feel overwhelmed or like your only focus is your own release. It's subtle.
Interesting. And finally, they have This formula for intimacy.
Right. This is a really concrete daily practice they recommend. Just 15 minutes a day focused on connection.
15 minutes doing what?
Emotional connection, like real eye contact, sharing something meaningful, spiritual connection, maybe reading something together, praying if that fits, and physical connection, hugging, holding hands, passionate kissing.
So it's about building that overall intimacy foundation.
Exactly. The idea is that builds the strong base, the fertile ground, for a better sexual relationship to grow on.
These all sound like really practical things couples could try. Now, the book also goes into roadblocks, right? Things that get in the way.
Absolutely. And understanding those is just as important. One really big one they talk about is spectatoring.
Spectatoring, like watching sports.
Kind of. It's when you're mentally watching and evaluating yourself or your partner during sex. Am I doing this right? Is she enjoying this? How am I performing?
Oh, I can see how that would kill the mood, being
Ah,
stuck in your head.
totally. It stifles spontaneity, diminishes enjoyment, like trying to dance while constantly critiquing your steps in a mirror. Pulls you right out of the moment.
So how do you stop doing that if you realize you are?
They suggest a few things, like consciously decide that intercourse isn't the only definition of good sex, redefine success, focus on the simple pleasure of touch without aiming for a specific outcome.
Just be present.
Yeah, and actively distract yourself from those judging thoughts. Immerse yourself in the sensations, maybe even say out loud what you're enjoying about your partner. They tell that story about Terrell and Alan.
Right, where the evaluation just brought back old issues.
Exactly. It shows how easily it can happen.
And then there's keeping score. That sounds bad.
Yeah, it's basically tallying things up, counting experiences or responses. They tell that wild true story about the couple aiming for 200 times in 1 year.
200? Seriously?
Seriously. And it just turns sex into this pressured chore, completely misses the point of connection and pleasure. Becomes like a fitness goal, not intimacy.
Wow. Okay, what about asking questions during sex? Like, was that good? Is that a problem?
They flag that too. Call it a form of hovering, maybe showing unmet expectations. Even if well-intentioned, those questions can put pressure on your partner.
So what should you do instead?
They suggest replacing those evaluative questions with affirmative statements. Just express your own feelings, your own enjoyment. That feels amazing, instead of, did that feel good?
It's a subtle shift, but potentially powerful.
They also touch on deeper patterns too, don't they? Like insecurity or addiction. Yes, they mention patterns like the insecure, sexually needy male, and they stress how important it is to deal with underlying stuff like shame, control issues, or definitely sexual addiction. These are huge intimacy blockers.
And just everyday life getting in the way.
Yeah, common disruptions. They really push the need to prioritize the marriage amidst all the busyness. They even mention different types of non-ideal lovers, like the watchful one, the avoidant one, the inhibited one, recognizing those tendencies.
And jealousy, that can wreck things too, I imagine.
For sure. They use that example of Tom and Brenda, where his jealousy about her past, even before him, just poisoned their current intimacy. Trust is fundamental.
Right. And they also discuss being inhibited or anxious.
Yeah, they look at the characteristics of the inhibited lover, the anxious lover, and really emphasize needing to address whatever underlying issues are causing that.
And they don't shy away from sexual addiction.
No, they tackle it directly. The characteristics, the impact, and the need for professional help. They also cover situations where a wife might lose interest, maybe feeling uncared for, stress, physical issues.
And the husband's role in that.
Crucial. To be sensitive, understanding, maybe gently encourage counseling. And importantly, they address painful sex for women, emphasizing, take her pain seriously, believe her, seek proper medical help like a pelvic floor specialist.
That's really comprehensive.
Oh.
Okay, shifting gears a bit, they talk about affair-proofing the marriage. That's a big concern for many.
It really is. And they start by acknowledging something maybe uncomfortable, that even in committed marriages, attraction to others can happen. It's a reality.
They use that Sam and Jenny story, right?
Yeah.
How innocent connections can become risky.
Exactly. And they point out that big life changes can make people more vulnerable too.
And addictive tendencies, how does that link to affairs?
They suggest that for some, if sex has become tangled up with risk or guilt, maybe from past experiences, paradoxically, sex outside the marriage can start to feel more exciting, more forbidden, and therefore more tempting than intimacy within the marriage.
Wow. And an unhappy marriage itself is a risk factor.
Definitely a risk factor, though never an excuse. Things like unmet needs, those love secrets, they talk about a low emotional bank account, way more negative interactions than positive. These can weaken the bond.
So what do they recommend to proactively build that protective wall?
They give 6 key strategies.
Hmm.
1, consistently invest time and energy in the marriage. 2, accept, even appreciate your differences.
Okay.
3, pursue common interests together.
Yeah.
4, build togetherness, that daily connection thing again. 5, consciously avoid mentally rehearsing infidelity. Focus on positive thoughts about your spouse.
And 6?
Have speedy exit plans ready for when temptation pops up. Know how you'll handle it beforehand.
It sounds like really solid advice for strengthening the core relationship. And I like this idea they bring up about creating adventures within the marriage.
Yes. This is about intentionally bringing back some of that newness, that excitement from the early days, or the kind of false excitement an affair might seem to offer.
Right, but doing it in a healthy way within the marriage.
Exactly. They contrast the destructive nature of affairs with the potential for real, lasting joy through shared adventures together, like Dan and Kate in their example.
So what are the keys to creating these adventures?
They list 5 things: share a secret, plan ahead, build anticipation, entice each other playfully, be lighthearted and playful, and consciously try to capture her heart all over again.
I love that, bringing back the romance intentionally. Now, the book's title is about great sex, and they seem to say it involves both work and fun.
Exactly right. They're clear. Great sex is amazing, but it rests on a foundation of commitment, being vulnerable, respecting each other's sexual rights and needs. It takes work.
So what does working at sex look like, according to them?
They give 10 ways. Things like thinking intentionally about your sexual relationship, setting mutual goals together, they give examples, scheduling time, not always for intercourse, just connection time,
Okay.
shopping with your spouse in mind, thoughtful little gestures, talking openly and sensitively about sex with boundaries, continuously learning about each other's bodies, desires. They change over time.
Sure.
Experimenting without pressure, resisting the urge to control the outcome, negotiating differences respectfully, and sometimes even choosing to abstain for a bit to build desire.
Okay, that's the work side. What about the fun side? How do you inject that?
10 ideas for that too. Laughing together is huge. Playful experimentation, thoughtful surprises, using a little shock, small energizing shakeups to the routine.
Like what kind of shock?
Just something unexpected but positive, maybe a slightly different approach, a new location, nothing jarring, just different. Also, treating each other thoughtful gifts, preparing the setting, focused attention, pleasuring through non-demanding touch. Teasing playfully but sensitively. Always read the room. Playfully resisting sometimes. Creating special settings. And creative play, like role-playing if you're both into it.
It sounds like a really holistic view. They also talk about the senses, right?
Absolutely. How sight, smell, touch, taste, and hearing words, sounds of pleasure, all play a huge role in attraction and enjoyment. And they address imagination and fantasy, too.
What's their take on fantasy?
That it's powerful, but carries responsibility. The key is focusing on images and scenarios that honor and ultimately strengthen the marriage bond, not undermine it.
That makes sense. Now, we definitely need to talk about the chapter on pornography and the internet. It's such a huge issue today.
A massive issue. And the Penners are very direct. Their strong advice is stay away from porn. They point to its addictive nature and the potentially devastating impact on individuals, marriages, families.
They trace how the internet made it so much more accessible.
Right. And they provide a list of questions, quite probing ones, to help someone honestly assess if they might have a problem with internet porn.
How do they define sexual addiction in this context?
As a fundamental lack of control over sexual behavior, where it significantly interferes with real intimacy and connection in the marriage.
If someone reads those questions and thinks, uh-oh, that might be me, what steps do the Penners suggest?
They outline 5 key steps. First, start with the heart, acknowledge you're powerless over it, repent, commit to change.
Okay.
Second, change life patterns, practical things like screen visibility, filters, getting an accountability partner. Third, focus on internal healing therapy, support groups, spiritual growth.
Makes sense. It's not just about behavior change.
Right. Fourth, intentionally rebuild intimacy with your spouse, emotional, spiritual first, then physical. And fifth, crucial, ongoing accountability. Be accountable to someone trustworthy.
That's a clear path. Finally, they have that specific word to the wives. What's the main takeaway for women reading this?
The core message is really an encouragement to enjoy the process of sex, not just focus on the result, like orgasm. They bust some common myths about female sexuality.
Like what?
Well, reinforcing that goal-oriented sex doesn't really work well for women either. cautioning against that spectatoring habit we discussed, encouraging women to be active players, not just watchers.
And urging them to take the lead sometime.
Yes, to lead with their sexuality through communication, taking responsibility for their own desires. They give 5 keys for how to do that.
Which are?
Know your body. Know what really works for you, what winds your clock. Communicate that effectively to your husband. Know him to his needs, maybe for space sometimes, the cycles of intimacy. And fundamentally, give yourself permission to enjoy sex, yours and his.
They also address specific worries wives might have.
Yeah, things like fearing they're just giving in, feeling angry at their husband, feeling like he doesn't listen when they do communicate, or just feeling not sexual. They offer advice for each of those.
So the overall message for wives.
Protect the marriage. Plan adventures together. Use imagination positively. Have fun, and give yourself full permission to be a vibrantly sexual person. They recommend their other book, too, Enjoy, specifically for women.
Wow. This has been incredibly thorough, a really deep dive into the Penner's approach. If you had to sum up the biggest takeaway message from all this.
I think the biggest thing is that great sex in marriage isn't just luck or chemistry. It's a journey.
No.
It absolutely requires understanding, open communication, mutual respect, and a real willingness from both people to move past myths and their own hangups.
It's intentional.
Very intentional. And the Penners really offer a practical, compassionate guide for couples wanting to build that deeper intimacy and passion.
Absolutely. And for everyone listening, as you think about all this, maybe consider, what one point really stood out most to you?
For me, I think it keeps coming back to that need for open communication, combined with the genuine effort to understand your partner's unique needs, both emotional and physical, moving from a self-focused view to a truly relational one.
That's a great summary. So for you, our listener, here's a final thought to maybe chew on. What's one small but intentional step you could take, maybe even today, to start shifting the dynamic in your relationship towards a more fulfilling, connected sexual experience with your spouse?
A great question to ponder. And we definitely encourage exploring the Penner's book, The Married Guy's Guide to Great Sex, if you want to go even deeper on this journey.
Definitely worth checking out for more guidance in this really vital part of marriage.